window which looks out into a mahogany tree across the street, and they've been nesting there for the past couple of years. So I get to watch them kind of every day, and I see them in those trees year-round, not in as big of numbers as they are in the summer, but they're around. But they're a native species. They eat poison, which I kind of like. Which, you know, if you touch it as a human, you're going to get a pretty bad rash, but they eat the berries all day long. We've been having them hang out in our driveway, and they tend to poop on the car lot, and lately it's been red. So I'm not sure what that means in a scientific sense. But they're just such beautiful birds. And, you know, the head looks like they're just painted with white out. And they've got this thing, which I love. Whenever I see it on the back, they've got this iridescent laddering. You can kind of see, so it changes color as they change color. And it just looks kind of shiny and cool. That's here. And they're pretty threatened. We protect them very well here. Then they fly to the Bahamas and Cuba where they shoot them. I mean, I think the only place you can probably walk around in Cuba with a shotgun is hunting white-crowned pigeons.
Why? Why?
It's a tourism industry. People travel to go shoot white-crowned pigeons.
Weren't they a big food source in the Keys?
I think they probably were back in the day, but then before the protections came in, the Keter National Wildlife Refuge and the Key West National Wildlife Refuge and the Migratory Bird Act too. So they were hunted, but then they realized their numbers were dropping, so we don't hunt them in the States anymore. I mean, I think in the Keys, they eat everything. I've had cons tell me about eating warblers, and pickled catbird was a thing. So, you know, everything used to be food source everywhere. You know, we're kind of realizing some species need to be protected more than others. The white-crowned pigeons are one of those species. But you see them in palm fronds and just kind of hanging around town. They've got that cool white eye. I'm just always pretty happy to see them. That's kind of view towards the federal courthouse. So if you ever really want to see them, even this time of year, the Studios of Key West has a rooftop now called Hughes View. It's on the 4th floor. If you take the elevator up, I think they're open 10 to 4, Tuesday to Saturday. You can go up there, and if you just watch the treetops around there, if you haven't seen one yet, odds are you will see one kind of hanging around up there, which is kind of fun. But they have, if you look at this, they've just got such tiny little heads. Part of the reason I recognize them from, like, if you see them in silhouette, you can tell just because they've got total pinheads. They're just like, that is not much of a skull to be accounted with.
So they're berry eaters?
Yeah, they're fruit eaters. Fructivores. And that shows the iridescent laddering in the back a little bit better. I just love that every time I see it.
Would you be likely to see them kind of hanging out with other pigeons, the ones that you see walking around on the...
You don't see them on the ground much.
Okay.
They tend to be tree dwellers, and you see them with other white-crowned pigeons. You don't really see them mixed in with, like, mourning doves or anything like that.
Okay.
They tend to keep themselves to themselves as a species. I've never had a feeder before. We've had a feeder in the backyard all summer, but we've had a lot of doves and stuff, but we haven't had white crowns yet. I'm working on it. Maybe if I put some fruit out for jelly. So this one, short-tailed hawk. And just get back to these guys. Yeah, they're all over the Caribbean. They kind of make it up to Everglades, and then that's where their range stops. So short-tailed hawk is kind of an interesting species. The fun fact about them is there's thought to be only 250 breeding pairs in all of North America, and they're all in Florida. So there's figure 500, maybe 700 of these birds, some non-breeders calculated in, some young birds and things like that. And I see one pretty much every day in the winter, which is kind of great. This is a dark phase. It's a juvenile. It tells juvenile because it's got that flecking in there. The adults have a more solid brown in the wings. But I see them every day. I ride through the cemetery on my bike, and I tend to see them flying around there. And you can see them up in the glades, but the thing is they like to stay over land. So in the Keys in the winter, we get this compression of there's not so much territory for them to hang around in. They all want to come down here in the winter. So it's hard to tell how many there actually are in Key West because they move around a lot faster than you do driving through town. So you don't know if you're seeing the same birds over and over again. It's really hard to survey them. But they are around. There's probably at least 6 or 7 who spend their winter in Key West every year. And they come in a dark phase like this, and then they come in a white phase also. And one of their more defining characteristics is the wingtip bend, which is called aeroelasticity. The wing they've got very flexible feathers in their wingtips. So that's kind of one of the easy visual cues when you see them flying. I mean, hawk watching is a whole skill in itself, and I learned by hanging out at the Florida Keys Hawk Watch up in Marathon, which goes from September to November every year. And I just hung around with those guys for a couple months until I started getting my brain wrapped around it. And I kind of worked into doing some hawk work that way. But so the wingtip bend is the kind of the big clue with these guys. That's another one. But they're always really high up because they're aerial hunters. That's another light phase. And what they do is they fly around, and when they see something they want to, like another bird that's down there looking unsuspecting or something, they drop onto them out of the sun. This is kind of a stoop that they do, and these are not great photos, but it gives you an idea of how they attack. And they will fall out of the sky and just land on something, but they will use the sun as behind them so nobody sees them. And that's generally how they feed. And they're really hard to capture. I mean, I've been paying attention to these guys for 20 years, and I probably have like 6 or 8 photos of them on the ground, touching something, not flying. This is one of my first ones I got. This is on Stock Island. This is what's I call a digiscope image, where you have a spotting scope and you hold your phone up with it. But that's when eating a chick that it nailed out by, I was out by the dog track, or back when it was a rusty anchor. We were there for the Christmas bird count one day. But
Is it green?
that's just kind of the vagaries of the photograph of me holding up a cell phone through a telescope.
Do they hunt fish or?
No, they only eat birds.
Only birds?
Only birds. That's all they've ever found. I mean, they're actually pretty understudied. The funniest thing is there's millions of these guys in South America. There's only 500 in North America. And they all live in Florida. And in the summer, they spend their time in the top 2/3 of the state. And in the winter, they slide down to the bottom of the tube sock. And so that's why we get to see so many of them. But once they're up there, they spread out, and it's really hard to find them. I was guiding once in early summer trying to find them for people, and I spent days not seeing them in a place where there's supposed to be a good number of them.
So which one is this?
This is a short-tailed hawk.
But I see them in thermals with the buzzards.
Yeah, they will hang out with turkey vultures. Kind of camouflages, and also a lot of times you see a lot of birds in thermals because it's kind of like the local elevator. And if we were in a more spread out landmass, there'd be more thermals around. But since we're in the Keys and there's limited land, there's limited thermals, so you got all these birds that don't necessarily like each other's company, but they'll ride the same thermal. And so these guys will hang out with turkey vultures. And so, yeah. I was lucky enough one day that this guy caught I think it's a mourning dove in my backyard. This is actually the mahogany tree right above my pool. So the pool was covered in feathers, which is great. But this is him kind of just chowing down. And it was just random luck that this happened to happen one day. So sometimes you get them perched. This one was at Fort Zach one day. We saw him perched. And this just so you know what it looks like when they fly away.
Where do they lay their eggs?
They nest in cypress domes, a lot of places in swampy land, high up in trees. But I had a rumor last year. There's someone called me like midsummer and said, "Hey, we've got this hawk nesting over by the cemetery over near Passover Lane." And I went over like a couple times, and I kept missing it. And then they called me and said, "The bird's here now." And then I write my book over and it'd be gone. And so I don't know if it was short tails nesting here. For the last couple of years, I've always been like waiting for certain birds to start nesting here. Short-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks, which we see. People used to call them chicken hawks, which, birds migrate largely for food resources. And at some point, you had to be like the chicken hawks. I'm like, we got a lot of chickens. Why don't you just stick around for the summer and do some work? And so I don't know what was nesting over there, but I have a suspicion it might have been a short-tailed hawk, because I've seen them pretty much every month of the year. And you never know if it's like a bird that just isn't ready for breeding or is maybe unwell, decide not to migrate, or something like that. But I've seen them all through the summer months when they shouldn't be here. So I'm starting to think we may get some nesting here in the summer. But this shot is one of my favorite shots. It's this is right across the street. What annoys me about this shot is I didn't take it. My wife texted me one day. She's like, "Hey, there's a hawk eating something across the street." She sent me like a terrible cell phone photo. I'm like, my big camera's on the table right there if you want to get a shot. And so she's got the best shot of a short-tail eating anything I've seen. I put it up on Facebook, and she got like 300 likes on it, which is just not fair. I bought the camera. So anyway, so this is one of the short tails in our neighborhood, but they're one of my favorite birds.
So what's their territory?
Florida. Pretty much they don't migrate out of the state.
Northern in the summer?
Northern 2/3 in the summer and southern 2/3 in the winter. I mean, every once in a while one will sneak over the border in Texas, but that's all that ever happens with them. But this one's doing what's called mantling, is if someone comes out and they think you might take their food, they do this. And so that's kind of what the bird is doing there.
Is that a male, female?
You can't tell by gender on hawk. If you weighed it, you would know because there's a weight and size range. Female hawks and raptors and birds of prey tend to be bigger than males. Sometimes you can tell by size, like with a Cooper's hawk. A lot of times, if it's really big or really small, you can tell. But with this, no, it's hard to tell.
How do they compare in size to like the chicken hawks that you saw in the farm?
They're about the same. I mean, roughly. I mean, there's probably a weight difference, but looking at them flying, I mean, scale is really hard when you're looking at a bird. It's not a reliable way to judge things unless you've got like two birds standing next to it. You know how big one is, and you know if it's bigger or smaller.
Is their screech different?
No, they sound kind of a little bit like a kestrel, but they don't screech that much. I've only heard it like 3 or 4 times. These guys, yeah, they're quiet. I mean, you don't see them on the ground a lot because of the way they hunt in the sky. When they perch, they just kind of go melt into a tree, and you tend to not see them very often.
Well, I've heard them when they circle.
Probably not them. Probably ospreys or Cooper's hawks or broadwing hawks.
Okay.
There's all sorts. Could be peregrine falcons. We get all sorts. We get I think 15 species of raptors coming through the Keys. So then we're gonna go to this guy, which is this is the Antillean nighthawk, and they're kind of really fun birds. Nighthawks are not hawks. I mean, everyone thinks they're hawks, but this is an Antillean nighthawk, and really what they are, they're in a family called, fun name is nightjars and goat suckers, because it's believed that they would sometimes steal milk from goats in South America. There's this myth, so the family got named goat suckers, which you don't want to talk about that in front of 8th grade classes or anything.
Yeah.
But you know, see how it's got the tiny little bill?
Yeah.
It's actually got a huge mouth with a tiny little bill, and their whole shtick is they fly around with their mouth open, eating bugs all night. That is how nighthawks live. Yeah, they're great. So this one is what's called an Antillean nighthawk, and they're in the lower Keys. I think I heard one in a parking lot in Marathon once, but they really don't get out of the Keys. I was on a boat in Cuba once, sleeping on deck, and I couldn't sleep because there were like 30 of them over the parking lot eating bugs in the streetlights. So they're more common there, but they're kind of at the north end of their range. So we only get to see a few of them here. And usually this is how you get to see them. This is not my photo. This is a guy named Carl Goodrich's photo. He lent me a couple years ago. But usually you see them like a little shape at night going flying around. And they're really fun to photograph because you have no light and they move really fast. So this is actually a really good photograph of an Antillean nighthawk doing its Antillean nighthawk stuff. This is the same one again. So there's one other bird they can be confused with when they're here, and that's the common nighthawk, and the differences are really apparent if you look at them. Totally obvious. So members of the nightjar and goatsucker family, they have what's called cryptic plumage, which is basically high-tech camouflage designed to confuse your brain. So you look at them, and it's really hard to describe that bird. What color is it? And so if you look at these two things, it really comes down to these tertial feathers here are more contrasty with these feathers down here. But it's really a tough call trying to distinguish the two species. They're the same size. They both overlap. Both of them breed down here. Commons will migrate through a lot in the fall and in the spring. But one of the ways we figured out that they were here. All right, I have audio aids here. Was so this is what a common nighthawk sounds like. That's them, and this is an Antillean. So if you hear that in the Keys in the summer, you're seeing an Antillean nighthawk. There used to be this older woman named Marge Brown who was like one of the great old lady birders down here in the Keys when I first got into it. And she always said like Antillean nighthawk is pitty pit pit and a common nighthawk is and that kind of works as a mnemonic. One of the fun things is, they're built to fly at night, so they've got these kind of eyelids that will just shut down and limit so much of light to come in. But the reason we know these birds are here is this guy named Roger Tory Peterson, who wrote the first field guide to birds, like the first real one you could carry in your back pocket. One of the things, when binoculars started being cheap and available to everybody, he kind of like created bird watching. He was the guy that kind of codified everything. And he was down here with this guy named Earl Green, who was the refuge manager at the time, and I think it was 42, maybe 39. And they were walking around, and a nighthawk flew over and called, and like Earl Green's like, common nighthawk from Roger Tory Peterson, who'd never seen one before, but had read about how their calls are distinct. It's like, no, that's an Antillean nighthawk. And he kind of put it on the map for us, which is kind of fun. I like the fact that the guy who created bird watching came down here and discovered another bird while he was here. But usually you see them kind of laying in trees. Also, a lot of times they're on the ground. So this, I don't know if you can see, but there's one in this photo. But they just they're convinced you can't see them, so you can walk really close to them. And then when they're like, okay, they can see me, they will just pop up into the air and fly off, and it's like, I was getting scared.
And about how long are they?
They're about this big, maybe.
So 7, 8 inches.
Yeah, they're not very big. But this is like another digiscope image, but that's that bird kind of lying there in the stones. And they really, for some reason, they're like scarified dirt. They lay their eggs in like rocky areas like that. You see them more up the Keys. You used to get them in Key West more when there were more gravel rooftops, because that's where they like to nest. But gravel rooftops are starting to go away when they redo buildings. So therefore, we're starting to lose habitat for birds like these guys and for least terns, who rely on gravel rooftops heavily. But there you see them more up the Keys. They're in Sugarloaf. They're pretty easy to find. The easiest place everyone goes to find them is Marathon Airport. If you hang out at Marathon Airport, they're always hanging down at the south end of the runway. And they're crepuscular, so they sleep all day. And then when the sun you go there at sunset, and you wait, and you start to give up hope, and you're like, well, the sun's been down for 20 minutes, I guess I'm going home. And then they start flying and call it. But you have to give up all hope in your heart. And then you get to see them. So the next one is, this one is called the black-whiskered vireo. And we don't get a lot of singing birds in the Keys. So in the summer, these guys breed all over in mangrove hammocks and stuff like that. So in the summer, this is one of the main birds you hear singing. So we'll try and play them too. Okay, fine. So in the summer, what you hear is this. And that's your soundtrack of being outdoors in the summer down here. But so you hear it everything. But the problem is you don't really see them. They're very shy birds. They're kind of skulky. So you go out looking for them, and I was leading a tour once with a bunch of people who really wanted to see a black-whiskered vireo. And when you're guiding them, there's a lot of pressure. Because, if you find a bird, you're a genius. If you don't, you're an idiot. It really doesn't have much to do with you. Especially, we'll talk about the next bird after this. But so I had there's one in this skinny little tree next to the side of the road. You could hear it calling. And we're waited for 20 minutes for it to come out, and it didn't. And never do this as a guide, but I did it. I went up to the tree and I shook it, thinking it would fly out so everyone could see it. Didn't move, just kept singing. So whenever you catch sight of them, but they look a lot like a bird called a red-eye vireo, but they've got this right here, this little kind of motorcycle gang mustache. Whiskers, they've got the cap, but when you see them, they've got that mustache, and that's kind of your big thing, your easiest tell for identifying them. And their range does go up the coast of Florida, but for some reason they're a lot easier here to find than most other places in Florida. Probably because we have more coastal mangroves that are easily accessible, I think.
What do they eat?
Bugs and berries. That's most small songbirds, that's their whole shtick, bugs and berries. They'll mix, protein and carbs and sugar. But they're just very, very sly birds.
And the size?
That maybe. They're a little bit bigger than a warbler. They got a little more heft. They've got a bigger bill. If you see, they're kind of sturdier. But yeah, they're not back yet. They go south in the winter and they start coming. They're one of the few birds that comes back to Key West. Like we get all these birds that come down for the winter and then disappear, and then like there's probably like 40 breeding species of birds in the Keys in the summer. So, but this is the one that comes back and kind of animates things. So I'm always happy to see them. And then this bird, the mangrove cuckoo. This is the hardest bird to find in Florida. I worked as a guide for a good number of years, and like this is the one everyone wanted me to show them. And a lot of times this is the view you get of them. If that, they're like the skulkiest bird ever. But I have a friend who guides for a company called Vent, or Victor Emanuel Nature Tours. It's one of the biggest tour companies in the country. And this guy knows everything about birds, like just kind of lives and breathes birds. And I ran into him in the Miami airport and we're having breakfast, and he was about to head out on a Keys tour with a bunch of people. And I was like, so you're gonna look for the cuckoo? And it's like, he was buttering his bagel and just like his whole body just slumped. And he was like, I hate that fucking bird. Because you've got like, even in the place where you know it's gonna be, you got like a 30% chance it's gonna show itself. Like I did a bunch of surveys on Navy property one summer, and I hit the same place at the same time of day over and over again, and like the bird would respond in the same zone like 30% of the time. Half the time they're just sitting in the trees laughing at you. So you get like skulky pictures like this, but occasionally you get lucky and you get like a good photo like this.
Ooh, he's
There's another one.
that's a good one.
Now, this is probably my best one. Where I mean, you never really get them out. I've got actually one or two somewhere, them sitting out in the open, but they're just incredibly hard to find. And sneaky. They're so sneaky that nobody knows if they migrate or just get quiet in the winter. Like nobody has a definitive answer on that. And we're just getting to the point where you can put a satellite tracker on one and monitor it. So I know they've done it up on the mainland and had like, I think, mixed results. And I know someone put some down here in the Keys this summer, but then the guy changed jobs, so I'm not sure what the results of that experiment were. I mean, the funny thing is there's 7 subspecies of these. There are Mexico, the Caribbean, all that stuff. All the other subspecies are gregarious. They'll just like, hey, how you doing? I'm a mangrove cuckoo. I don't care. The ones in the Keys, they just make it really difficult.
What's the song like?
Oh, I can play that.
Yeah.
This is what you want to listen to up the Keys. If you hear this, you're having a good day.
Do you have a site where you can hear the sounds that you recommend?
I have all these on my Sibley Bird app.
What is it called?
It's called the Sibley Bird app. That's where that came from. But
Cornell does it.
Cornell's got them almost there. And then there's this big website called Xenocanto, XENO-CANTO. And that's got like every bird in the world recorded. There are a lot of kind of not great recordings, but you can kind of look up pretty much anything in here if it has a call. But this is the mangrove cuckoo call.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So it's a beautiful melodic call.
Yeah.
Very sing-song, competes with the mockingbirds. I mean, I always think of a washing machine kind of breaking down, like like at the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
I know that's probably not the right way to think about nature, but that's what's in my head. So these guys they're around. I think we're gonna have an answer soon on whether they migrate or not, but we just don't really have a clear answer yet. So that's kind of there. And since I cheated a little bit with the black-whiskered vireo and it sneaks out of the Keys a little bit, I threw in a bonus bird, which is an 8th bird, which is the reddish egret, which they're not terribly rare. They're just one of my favorite fun birds to see. And they're mostly a Gulf Coast bird, and this is what they look like. You see them standing around. This is another one just kind of standing on the same bird. They look better on my computer. And you see them just kind of standing around a lot, and that's kind of okay. But then when they want to feed, they feed on tiny fish. So they do like a whole Martha Graham improv dance thing, where they run around and just kind of wave their wings around, and that kind of scares the fish. So then they see the fish, and then they nab the fish. But it's a whole shtick of like, they've got all these moves. And then there's this one.
I had one at my house and I thought it was
mentally injured.
Yeah, not artistically inspired, but mentally injured. That was okay.
And I thought it needed intervention.
Yeah, so that's kind of just how they move. They're kind of just great, flexible birds.
What is their range?
They're Gulf Coast. I mean, they're down in Central America, but they're mostly Gulf Coast. I think they're not in the northern end of the Gulf, so you can see this in like Texas and probably up to like, I would guess like Sanibel maybe a little farther north. But that's kind of the range. But it's one of those ones I always think of as a hometown local bird. Hold on a sec.
And how tall are they?
They're this tall, maybe 2 feet. I need to. Trying to find. This should be a video, please. It's not playing. I love that this worked perfectly when I was at home. See if I can do this quick.
Is that a gas cup? Your photo there, or is that the Canadian market?
Oh, that's just the screensaver on my laptop. I don't-
Okay.
Yeah, that's not anywhere I've actually been.
Not trash more.
Yeah, that's.
Not Key West.
Find the one.
In the fall.
Alright, we're gonna do it old school. I'm gonna get out my reminders that I have a talk at the Botanical Garden today. I don't need that on my calendar now. I'll do this. So this one, he's gonna nap. It's on my screen.
Wow.
Looks really great on here. Okay, hold on. Give me this. Oh, here we go. Here, we'll start with this one. I think we can make this. It's not on the screen. There we go. Just gonna nab a little fish. Kind of nice. You can see birds feeding. But then the music's gonna kick in his head. And it's not gonna be quite as dramatic. It's building. He's trying to resist. And now it's starting to happen. There it is. It's going off. That's like a big part of their shtick.
Stop rescuing them.
They look crazy, but they're really. Hold on, I have one more I think I can get to play, so we're gonna try. That's kind of more of the same, but still. Now my mouse has disappeared. Seriously, where did my mouse go? I really give up because my mouse just fried. All right, any questions? Happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to. Sure.
I'm sorry, I got here a little late, we had a meeting in Marathon.
Uh-huh.
Did you go over the red stoppers? They're such cute birds.
I mean, red starts, possibly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, those are American red starts. They're kind of one of about 45 different warbler species we have in North America, and they're boreal breeders. They breed up north,
Okay.
and then they come down here in the winter and hang out and spin around and eat bugs all day. And so we see a ton of them coming through in the fall, and about probably, I don't know, maybe 10% of them stay over the winter. A lot of them migrate south, and then they stay. But then you see them, like you'll see them if you walk around the gardens today. I'm sure there will be a few of them just spin around. They've got, if I could make my computer work, I would show you a picture. I've really never had the mouse disappear on my laptop. But they're very cool birds, but they're songbirds. We have a huge songbird migration that happens twice a year. And it'll start kicking in around probably first week of April and go through first week of May. And if you go to Fort Zach, that's a great place to see a ton of migrating songbirds. All these birds that are heading north, they'll come. We're the first stop for gas when they cross the water. And kind of your ideal situation to see migrating birds is you go to bed, it rains at like 1 or 2 in the morning, so that these birds flying from Cuba come here, hit weather, and decide, all right, well, I'm done for the day, and they land in Key West and hang out for a day or 2. And then you'll get to see them at Fort Zach or Indigenous Park is a great place, or here is a great place. Those are kind of the 3 good places to see migrating songbirds.
Do you get hummingbirds coming through?
Yeah, actually, they overwinter a lot too. They're around town. Look for somewhere with like Hong Kong orchids or red plants.
Okay.
That's what they really like. I've put up hummingbird feeders a bunch of times. Just had my heart broken every time. I've never had any response to a hummingbird feeder. Other people have. I think it's personal grudge against me.
I have a vision.
In Michigan, you're everywhere. I did an artist residency at this place in Western Oregon, the desert, and I noticed a lot of hummingbirds around. So I was there for a month, so I Amazoned myself some hummingbird feeders. They arrived 2 days later, and I hung them up. And like I literally hung them up, and 15 minutes later, there were 6 hummingbirds going at it. Whereas I've hung them up for months here, and all the hummingbirds have ignored them. But we do get a good number coming through. One of the great places also to see migration down here is the dry tortugas. And that's phenomenal because it's a tiny postage stamp in the middle of the island, in the middle of the ocean. So if you get birds that are getting pushed west by westerly winds, or pushed east by westerly winds, or stuff coming north, the island will sometimes just fill up with thousands of birds.
Really?
And there's always migrating stuff hanging around there. There's always hummingbirds and things like that. And from like late April to early May, mid-May, probably, you'll see stuff there.
How far north do the heron go?
Which one?
The white heron.
The great white heron? I mean, all birds sneak out of their range on a regular basis, so they've showed up in like New Jersey and places like that. But they really only breed here in the Keys, maybe the extreme southern part of the Everglades. But you don't really see them much north of that. That's kind of the northern part of their range.
When you see them in Wisconsin?
Not unless most likely what you see in Wisconsin would be gray egrets. Big white, that's going to be a big white bird there, but unless one went really far astray, it's not going to be a great white heron. They're pretty much only in the Keys.
Is there a way to identify a bird by the color of its poop that hangs out in my mahogany tree?
There's probably people who can do it, but I'm not one of them. I mean, there's people who can identify birds by their feathers. I don't know. I mean, I don't know of anyone who can identify them generally by poop.
It's really yellow.
Yeah.
It's all birds are yellow.
No, but I just, you got volume, you've got color, it depends what they're eating. Because like the white-crowned pigeons, their poop gets really red when they eat a lot of the berries in my driveway, which you don't see. It's not red everywhere, just the ones that we're feeding in my
It's in
driveway.
the same spot on my deck, so they must be nesting or hanging out.
And you're sure it's not iguanas?
This is such an interesting question.
I'm just saying.
I'm here today.
I get a lot of iguana poop on my deck, is all I'm saying.
And it's yellow?
Sometimes iguana poop looks kind of like